In a stunning show of defiance, protests started across China over this past weekend over that country's so-called zero COVID policy.
Yeah, from Shanghai to Beijing, protesters are saying the COVID lockdowns are too strict, and they're demanding China's President Xi Jinping resign. So for more, we are joined by Cal State East Bay professor of communication, Grant Kien. Grant, these protests are really unprecedented. Have we ever seen anything like this?
Well, of course, we've seen precedent in the Hong Kong protests, which also in some ways paralleled the social media aspect of what has been going on in terms of getting the information out. And so there is some precedent. It's much different, though, in the sense that this is mainland China, and it is known for having a firm hand when it comes to communication technology and organizing, and as we all see on the screen.
Yeah, you just really don't see it, like you said, on mainland China. Do we have a sense of how many people are participating? Is it really across China? And what is going to happen, do you think, to these people who are, for that country acting defiantly?
That's difficult to say. It does seem to be more widespread, and this is maybe something that is a little different from what we've seen, such as the Tiananmen Square protest, which was very localized. This type of protest is happening in numerous places throughout the mainland. So it is a little bit different in that way. What will happen and who is participating, it seems to be, from what I've been able to gather, mostly younger folks, and there's been a lot of kind of quiet protests done in the name of vigils for these people who have run into problems because of the strict lockdown there.
Yeah. I actually have spent a bit of time in Shanghai. It's a very Western, type city for China. Watching the videos of these protesters, how much influence do you think they're really going to have? I mean, do you think that the government will start relaxing some of the COVID restrictions?
Well, this is a really good question, and it's one that I've actually had some students do research on, some of my graduate students in the past, is the influence of technology in particular, and the opening up of information in China, which is in some ways inevitable, although there's what they call the Great Firewall, that they censor heavily, they monitor it heavily. There's a lot of effort put into the control of information, but nonetheless, the technology is what it is, and so there is some change happening in terms of what people expect on the ground there. And like you, I have spent some time on the ground in China, and I got a sense of how change may incrementally come through the use of these ways of connecting with people, and also very clever uses of technology, using code words instead of people's names, for example, and everybody just knows who they're talking about.
Why do you think so few people in China have been able to have access to the vaccine? I think that's a part of this too.
Oh, that is a little difficult for me to answer. I don't have my finger on the pulse of that exact issue. So I can definitely talk about the ways that people are connecting, though, and the effect that that's having.
Yeah, we're pretty short on time, but I do want to get this question into you. How is this going to affect world trade? And I know this sounds very selfish on our part, but the protests that took place, the riot basically, was at a plant that was making iPhones.
Yeah, that does seem to be ground zero for what we're seeing. It's also, I think, important to understand the context of what's going on over population size. You know, for us, 1 million people seems like a lot, and it is. But in a country that has 1.5 billion people, 1 million people is not that much. So while it does create waves and ripples in the global market, it does tell us a little bit about what's going on. One of the things that I learned when I spent time in China, you know, you spend a day there and you feel like you can write a book. You spend a week and you think you can write an article. You spend a month there, though, and you realize that maybe what you thought you knew isn't exactly what's going on.
Isn't that the truth? Well, thank you so much for joining us, Professor, Cal State East Bay, Professor of Communications, Grant Kien.